gonna jackknife his truck.
I need to move that car.
It began before dawn headlights cutting through the mist at a truck stop in Indiana. Diesel fumes hung in the air. Then came the flashing lights. Agents in dark jackets fanned out their radios, crackling with one word: freeze. Within minutes, 18-wheelers stood motionless, their drivers ordered out at gunpoint. Some had just finished long hauls from California. Others were asleep in their cabs. But to immigration and customs enforcement, this wasn't just a traffic stop, it was a battlefield. What happens when America's arteries, its highways, become the next front line in immigration enforcement? Over the past weeks, an escalating wave of deadly highway crashes involving foreign truckers has turned rest stops into ICE checkpoints. According to Reuters and BBC News, at least 7 multi-vehicle collisions since September left more than 30 dead and dozens injured. In several cases, drivers were found to lack commercial licenses or English proficiency required by federal law. The images: mangled semis, overturned tankers, shattered windshields have gone viral, fueling national outrage and political fire. President Donald Trump, standing at the White House press podium, declared every mile of American road will be secured, no exceptions, no excuses. His words set the tone for what insiders now call Operation Freight Shield, a joint ICE and Department of Homeland Security initiative targeting unlicensed or undocumented truckers nationwide. According to Defense News, the operation uses AI-based license plate tracking, interstate weigh station data, and aerial surveillance drones once reserved for Border Patrol missions. The move marks a profound shift immigration enforcement bleeding into domestic commerce. The United States, already strained by labor shortages and logistics, now faces a showdown between national security and economic survival. As DW notes, trucking carries 72% of America's freight, from food and fuel to military hardware. But with hundreds of foreign drivers detained or deported in the first week alone, deliveries have stalled across the Midwest, sending freight prices soaring and supply chains into panic mode. Analysts warn of deeper consequences. The Guardian highlights growing tensions between Washington and Ottawa after Canadian truckers reported being held at ICE checkpoints despite valid visas. Meanwhile, in Europe, NATO officials privately compare the situation to border controls during wartime mobilizations. When trucks stop, one strategist said economies suffocate and power shifts. The parallels extend far beyond America's roads. In Ukraine, military convoys rely on secure transport corridors. In the Red Sea, Iranian-backed militias have attacked freight routes. In the Pacific, US-China rivalry over shipping lanes intensifies. The same logic applies: whoever controls the flow of goods controls leverage, strategy, and sovereignty. Yet behind the policy and politics are the people. The exhausted driver from Honduras, detained after delivering produce to Kansas. The Pakistani mechanic who lost his work permit and vanished into ICE custody. The American trucker in Ohio whose brother died in a crash caused by an untrained recruit. Each one a thread in a vast web connecting fear, survival, and national identity. As the sun rises over America's highways, the flashing lights don't fade, they multiply. The question echoing through truck stops tonight is no longer who's hauling next, but who's safe to haul at all. And in this new war between safety and freedom, will the United States secure its roads or lose its soul trying? Screams metal fire, the chaos of twisted steel on Interstate 80 didn't fade with sirens. It lingered in the air like smoke. Dash cam footage from the scene shows a semi-truck barreling through traffic before flipping across 3 lanes, igniting a chain reaction of explosions. By sunrise, 3 lives were gone, one of them a 29-year-old American mother driving her children to school. The driver who caused the wreck, a foreign national with a newly issued commercial license, unable to understand a police command, shouted in English. This is the face of America's trucking crisis, not just accidents, but the collapse of trust on the road. According to Reuters, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration (FMCSA) recorded a 38% spike in fatal trucking collisions over the past year, with a third involving drivers who received U.S. licenses less than 6 months ago. Investigations by BBC and DW reveal how some private training centers issued certificates without verifying English comprehension or U.S. residency. It's a loophole that allowed thousands of underqualified drivers to enter one of the most dangerous professions in America. For years, the industry relied on migrant labor to keep goods moving, but the same system that sustained America's logistics backbone now threatens to fracture it. Veteran truckers, men and women who have hauled freight for decades, describe highways as a war zone. In Missouri, a convoy of drivers staged a protest blocking lanes with their rigs while waving signs reading "Safety before quotas." The outrage isn't xenophobia, it's fear. Every crash is a reminder of how fragile the infrastructure of trust has become. A missed translation can mean a missed stop sign. A poorly trained driver can mean a dozen funerals. In response, the Trump administration's ICE and DHS teams have begun conducting on-site license audits and real-time GPS data sweeps, cross-referencing driver registries with immigration records. No one should die because a government failed to check credentials, declared acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf during a press conference in Arizona. His tone was sharp, his words calculated for a nation on edge. But beneath the enforcement lies a darker economic reality. According to The Guardian, major freight companies face bankruptcy as raids disrupt deliveries and spook insurers. Trucking is the bloodstream of America, said economist Rebecca Hartman. If ICE freezes the flow, the whole body goes into shock. Meanwhile, the global context mirrors the crisis. In Ukraine, logistics convoys supplying frontline units face constant sabotage, forcing Kiev to tighten driver vetting. In the Middle East, Israeli tank transport routes near the Golan Heights are now guarded by intelligence teams to prevent infiltration by disguised drivers. Even in Asia, the US-China trade standoff has weaponized shipping permits and port access, proving that logistics is no longer mere commerce, it's strategy. Yet amid this geopolitical chessboard, ordinary people bear the cost. The families waiting for medical shipments delayed by ICE detentions. The factory workers sent home early because parts never arrived. The foreign driver who breaks down sobbing at a way station, terrified that one broken taillight means deportation. Security and freedom now collide at every toll booth. And as President Trump doubles down on the America First on the Road directive, one question hangs heavy over the interstates. How many lives must burn on the asphalt before America learns that enforcement without reform is just another kind of wreck? It begins with a simple command, pull over. But when the driver doesn't understand the situation, escalates in seconds. On a rain-slick night in Tennessee, dashcam footage captured an ICE officer shouting instructions as a truck rolled forward instead of stopping. Moments later, the vehicle jackknifed across both lanes, narrowly missing a school bus. The officer's report summarized the event in 2 words: language failure. Across America, that failure is becoming deadly. A joint report by BBC News and Reuters found that nearly 1 in 5 active CDL holders in 2025 lacks functional English comprehension. Signs like low clearance or bridge out might as well be written in code. For drivers hauling 40 tons of steel at 70 miles per hour, misunderstanding isn't an inconvenience, it's a death sentence. Language barriers aren't cultural issues anymore, said transportation analyst Carla Neumann to DW. They are national security risks. Her warning reflects a deeper truth. A highway system built on trust and precision now depends on drivers who can't interpret its rules. ICE's newly expanded Operation Freight Shield targets precisely this gap. According to Defense News, federal agents now deploy mobile AI units capable of scanning vehicle telematics, cross-matching route data with linguistic assessments logged during license testing. Drivers flagged for inconsistent responses are stopped and questioned. Detractors call it profiling, supporters call it prevention. Inside the trucking world, resentment festers. American veterans feel pushed aside by cheap labor and weak oversight. Foreign drivers, many of them legal immigrants, feel hunted. Both sides drive the same roads, but in different realities. Meanwhile, the pressure mounts internationally. Al Jazeera reports that Mexico's government formally protested after 43 of its nationals were detained during ICE raids in Texas and Illinois, calling it a systematic criminalization of foreign workers. Canada and the Philippines have voiced similar concerns, warning that the crackdown could disrupt food and supply exports worth billions. The rift extends far beyond economics. European observers see echoes of their own crises. In Poland and Germany, undertrained Ukrainian haulers rushed into service amid the ongoing war have triggered debates about licensing and road safety. NATO logistics planners privately worry that a US crackdown on migrant truckers could inspire parallel restrictions across Europe, slowing military resupply corridors critical for deterrence against Russia. And in Asia, China's state media has seized the narrative accusing Washington of hypocrisy. The land of freedom cannot read its own road signs. At home, the human toll deepens. Dispatchers whisper warnings about ICE checkpoints at truck stops from Oklahoma to New Jersey. Families wait for phone calls that never come. One Honduran driver detained in Ohio was later found to have been delivering insulin shipments to hospitals. His absence forced emergency rationing. Each miscommunication ripples outward. One lost message, one missed command, one misunderstood sign, another tragedy. President Trump's administration insists the crackdown is necessary, framing it as both a safety measure and a patriotic duty. But critics question whether enforcement alone can fix an education and certification system that's already broken. How long can America demand perfect obedience from drivers who can't even understand the words being spoken to them? And as flashing lights sweep across another lonely truck stop tonight, one truth grows clear in the war, for America's roads language itself has become the front line. Before dawn, the convoy rolled out from Fort Wayne black SUVs, flanked by unmarked enforcement trucks. Inside, agents checked maps marked with red pins weigh stations' rest areas, truck stops, and logistics hubs. Over encrypted radios, one phrase repeated, "Freight Shield is green." The operation months in planning had begun. According to Reuters and Defense News, Operation Freight Shield represents the most extensive domestic enforcement campaign since the Secure Communities Initiative of the late 2010s. Its mission purged the commercial freight sector of unlicensed, undocumented, and fraudulent operators. ICE, DHS, and the Department of Transportation now function as one machine, their databases linked through a new AI fusion system dubbed Sentinel-Net. Originally developed for border control, the network now scans every bill of lading, every license number, every driver crossing state lines. Agents describe it as predictive policing for highways. Critics call it digital profiling. But as President Donald Trump declared from the Oval Office, if a truck rolls on our roads, America deserves to know who's behind the wheel. The stakes go far beyond immigration. DW reports that DHS analysts believe criminal networks have infiltrated freight routes to smuggle narcotics and counterfeit electronics into major U.S. cities. Jane's Defense Weekly adds that similar logistics vulnerabilities allowed Russia to flood Eastern Europe with illicit drone components in 2024, a warning not lost on U.S. intelligence. Thus, Freight Shield is more than policy, it's a test of national resilience. The enforcement blitz has already produced dramatic scenes. Drone footage from The Guardian shows dozens of semis corralled off I-10 in Texas, drivers lined up in the desert heat as ICE agents process paperwork under portable floodlights. Elsewhere, armored vehicles from DHS's Tactical Operations Division have secured border state depots suspected of harboring illegal transport rings. But the operation's reach extends to the heartland. In Iowa and Michigan, undercover agents posing as dispatchers infiltrated recruiting firms accused of forging commercial licenses. Several arrests revealed connections to shell companies linked with Central American cartels. Homeland Security officials believe these networks use long-haul freight to move both narcotics and human cargo. For Washington, this is no longer just about safety, it's about sovereignty. The U.S. highway grid, once viewed as the backbone of prosperity, has become an invisible border wall stretching from coast to coast. Globally, the message resonates. Israel, reeling from Iranian proxy attacks on fuel convoys, has mirrored the U.S. strategy with its own highway integrity directive. Ukraine's Military Logistics Command is adopting similar AI scanning tools to verify the identity of drivers supplying frontline units. Even Japan has quietly expanded roadside surveillance to counter potential Chinese espionage via civilian freight companies. Yet the more tightly America grips control, the louder the protests grow. Civil rights groups warn that the use of AI profiling could lead to mass detentions based on linguistic patterns rather than evidence. The American Trucking Alliance estimates 14% of active drivers are foreign-born legal residents who now avoid routes through enforcement-heavy states. The economic impact is already visible: delayed shipments, rising fuel costs, and surging consumer prices, a ripple that touches every household. Still, supporters of the crackdown argue the trade-off is necessary. Security before convenience, said White House Homeland Advisor Grant McAllister. No cargo is worth a single American life. But the line between vigilance and overreach is blurring fast. As ICE agents scan IDs under floodlights and drones circle above silent truck stops, the question grows sharper with every passing convoy. Can a nation safeguard its highways without turning them into checkpoints of fear? The first shortages appeared quietly. Grocery store shelves missing basic goods, construction sites stalled for lack of steel beams, medical suppliers waiting on refrigerated trucks that never arrived. Within 2 weeks of Operation Freight Shield, the nation's lifeline began to choke. The trucking industry, which moves nearly 3/4 of U.S. freight, operates like a living organism. Every delay ripples outward from factories to ports, from farms to hospitals. When ICE checkpoints started freezing the flow of trucks across state lines, the system convulsed. According to Reuters, freight capacity plunged 18% in the first month, while The Guardian reported average shipping costs skyrocketed by 42%. Companies from Walmart to FedEx quietly invoked emergency logistics clauses to reroute deliveries through unaffected states. But for thousands of small haulers, there was no escape. Independent operators, many employing foreign-born drivers, found their trucks impounded or their insurance canceled overnight. One logistics firm in Chicago told BBC News that a quarter of its fleet sat idle under ICE hold orders. "We're collapsing under our own security," a supervisor lamented off record. The White House, however, remains resolute. President Trump's Economic Council argues the short-term shock is a strategic recalibration designed to restore American dominance over its domestic freight corridors. "We've depended on overseas labor and weak oversight for too long," said Commerce Secretary Linda Barrington during a press briefing. "This correction hurts, but it's necessary to reclaim control of the supply chain." Yet markets don't share the optimism. Wall Street's transportation index tumbled 12% in a single week, and energy distributors warned that disruptions in diesel supply could push fuel prices above $6 per gallon, a record unseen since 2022. Meanwhile, DW reports that European shipping conglomerates are exploiting the chaos, offering premium freight contracts to reroute U.S. exports through Canadian ports. The crisis has geopolitical overtones. Russia's state media gloated that America's internal enforcement is achieving what sanctions could not: economic self-strangulation. In Tehran, Al Jazeera reported Iranian economists hailed Freight Shield as proof that America's obsession with control undermines its own markets. And in Beijing, analysts see opportunity with U.S. supply chains constricted. China is pushing new export deals across Latin America and Africa, tightening its trade sphere as Washington looks inward. The Pentagon, however, views the situation through a different lens. Military logistics units dependent on commercial haulers for non-classified shipments now face shortages in parts and ammunition transfers. A leaked Jane's Defense Weekly memo warns that continued disruption of interstate freight may degrade rapid deployment readiness within 90 days. For a superpower projecting strength from Europe to the Pacific, that's not just an economic threat, it's a strategic one. At truck stops nationwide, the tension is palpable. American drivers cheer the crackdown, but fear the collapse. No foreign drivers means no freight, one driver told a Reuters crew outside Dallas. "We're winning the war, but starving the army." And in the towns built around the trucking economy, rest stops, diners, repair shops, silence reigns. Parking lots that once buzzed with engines now sit empty under floodlights. The ICE checkpoints remain humming like sentinels. As The Guardian notes, every great empire has faced a moment when it chose between control and capacity. Rome once strangled its trade routes in the name of order and fell when the grain stopped flowing. Night falls over a truck stop in Kansas. Diesel pumps hum under harsh fluorescent lights. Rows of rigs sit silent, their engines cold, their drivers gone detained, deported, or simply too afraid to drive. What was once a symbol of American grit has become a landscape of fear. Across the nation, Operation Freight Shield rolls on. According to Reuters, ICE checkpoints now appear on 19 major interstates stretching from California to Florida. The Department of Homeland Security calls it a milestone in border integrity, but to many Americans, it feels like the country is building walls inside itself. The political divide is deepening. Supporters of President Trump hail the crackdown as a victory for law and order. "No more unqualified drivers, no more excuses," declared Texas Governor Greg Abbott at a rally in Dallas. Yet civil rights lawyers citing The Guardian warned that the campaign risks normalizing indefinite roadside detentions without due process. "You don't need a passport to buy milk," one critic said, "but soon you may need one to deliver it." Inside the trucking world, the crisis has forced a reckoning. The American Trucking Association estimates the driver shortage could surpass 150,000 by year's end, a record. Veteran drivers demand better pay and safety protections. Recruiters scramble to fill gaps. And automation giants like Tesla and Aurora push to fast-track autonomous freight systems. DW reports that German manufacturers are already testing AI-guided trucks for NATO logistics, a future that may arrive faster in America than anyone expected. But automation brings its own dangers. Defense analysts from Jane's caution that fully networked freight systems, if hacked, could paralyze military logistics in a conflict scenario. The nightmare is no longer theoretical, and Ukraine-Russian cyber attacks on logistics convoys in 2024 delayed fuel shipments to front lines for days. The Pentagon quietly admits the same vulnerability exists here at home. Meanwhile, the human toll grows. Thousands of migrant families now face eviction as breadwinners remain in ICE custody. Food banks report record demand from laid-off drivers. And across truck stops, once defined by camaraderie, suspicion now reigns. Americans against foreigners, lawmen against laborers, machines against men. Globally, the ripples spread. In Israel, the recent escalation with Iran has exposed vulnerabilities in transport routes once thought secure. In China, state media portrays Freight Shield as proof that America's democracy is collapsing under its own weight. And in Europe, NATO economists warn that disruptions in US freight could delay Allied weapons shipments by weeks, a risk that plays straight into Moscow's hands. Yet amid the noise, reformers whisper a different vision. They call for bilingual training programs, international license verification systems, and renewed investment in domestic infrastructure, and approach blending enforcement with education, not fear. We can defend our borders without destroying our roads, said policy analyst Martha Reynolds on Al Jazeera. Security isn't about stopping the flow, it's about guiding it safely. Still, the fear lingers. Every flashing light on the highway, every checkpoint, every missing truck is a reminder that America's greatest strength mobility is now its greatest vulnerability. The road ahead is uncertain, but one truth remains clear: no nation can remain free if its people are too afraid to move. So as the engines fall silent across America's heartland, a final question hangs in the night air. When safety becomes surveillance and patriotism becomes paralysis, who's really in the driver's seat of the American dream? The U.S. trucking industry has become the front line of a sweeping immigration and security crackdown under President Donald Trump's Operation Freight Shield. Triggered by a surge of fatal highway crashes involving foreign drivers, the campaign unites ICE, DHS, and federal agencies in the largest domestic enforcement sweep in decades. Drawing from Reuters, BBC, DW Defense News, Jane's Al Jazeera, and The Guardian, this cinematic expose reveals how America's roads, once symbols of freedom, have turned into arenas of fear and division. While officials defend the raids as vital to national safety, the economic toll is staggering: freight delays, supply shortages, and skyrocketing costs. Global rivals exploit the chaos as NATO logistics and US readiness come under pressure. Beneath it all lie human stories of loss, isolation, and mistrust. The film closes on a haunting truth that America's strength has always been its motion. But when the engines stop and checkpoints rise, the nation must decide: will it rebuild its highways through reform and unity, or surrender them to fear and